We're up to 130 pounds of sugar per year, each of us. That's 6.5 ounces of sugar per day per person in America. And the question is, we used to consume 1 ounce. We now consume 6.5 ounces. The question is, what does that do to you? That's where we'll go. The third political wind. The USDA, the AMA, and the AHA call for dietary reduction, as I said. How come? To prevent what? Heart disease. Did it work? No. Did not work. Why did it not work? Well, here's why. In the early 1970s, we discovered this stuff called LDL. Brown and Goldstein got a Nobel Prize for it. In the mid-1970s, we learned that dietary fat raised your LDL. So imagine dietary fat is A and LDL is B. So A leads to B. And that's still true. That's true today. In the late 1970s, we learned that LDL correlated with cardiovascular disease in populations. So if cardiovascular disease is C, we learned that B correlates with C. So the question was, well, if A leads to B and B is correlated with C, then A must lead to C, therefore no A, no C. That was the idea. Get rid of dietary fat, heart disease will go away. That was the mantra, and that's what led to everything that's happened since. That was the beginning of the true tsunami. Back in the 1970s, there was a big war going on between the fat and the sugar people. And this is two examples of that fight. Over here we have Pure, White, and Deadly about sugar, written by a British physiologist, nutritionist, physician by the name of John Yudkin, written in 1972. This is a hard book to find, but I recommend that everybody go look for it. It is a prophecy. It is amazing. I am in awe of this man, that he came up with this back then, before the sugar glut, and knew that this was true. So this idea has been around a long time. I didn't make this up. Over here, we have something different. We have the 7 countries study by a guy by the name of Ansel Keys. Anybody heard of Keys? Okay, the K ration during World War II, that's Keys for K ration. Okay? And he was convinced that dietary fat, in particular saturated fat, was the cause of heart disease. And he thought that for various reasons, mostly because he spent the year 1952 on sabbatical in Britain, and he saw what they ate, and he said, this is the cause. So here's the original case against fat. Here's his original 7 countries study right here. US, Canada, Australia, England, and Wales. That's 2 countries, by the way, I didn't know that. Italy, Japan. Okay, there they are. Percent calories from fat, coronary disease. Looks good, right? Except for one little problem. It wasn't the 7 country study, it was the 22 country study. So here are the whole 22 countries. Now, there's still a correlation. I'm not arguing that. But it doesn't look nearly as good as it did before. Okay? And he left some out here, because here's some outliers. The Maasai, the Inuit, the Rendille, the Tokelau indigenous tribes, they eat only fat. And they have the lowest incidence of heart disease on the planet. So, if it's all about the fat, what's going on? So, take a look at these, and take a look at this statement. The fact that the incidence rate of coronary disease, this is from Keys' own work, is correlated with the average percentage of calories from sucrose in the diets is explained by the intercorrelation of sucrose with saturated fat. In other words, donuts. Partial correlation analysis shows that with saturated fat constant, there was no significant correlation between dietary sucrose and the incidence of coronary heart disease. This was a multivariate linear regression analysis. Now, when you do that kind of analysis, you have to do it both ways. First, you hold fat constant and show sucrose doesn't work, and then you hold sucrose constant and show that fat still works. He didn't do it. He did half of it. He didn't do the other half. Where's the other half? Ain't there. Why not? I don't know. But it ain't there. So the question is this real? But we based 30 years of nutrition policy in this country on this. This led to the low-fat craze. Okay? Now, you can control what you make in your own kitchen. You can have as low a fat of food as you want in your own kitchen. But the the fat content of low-fat processed food is a whole other story. Because when you take the fat out, food tastes like cardboard. Food industry knows that. Take the fat out, got to do something to make it palatable. What do? You add the sugar. right? And either HFCS or sucrose. And here's a perfect example of a recipe that was doctored specifically for that purpose, Snackwells. And they're still with us today. 2 grams of fat out, 13 grams of carbohydrate up, 4 of which are sugar. So I would pose to you, which is worse? The Oreo or the Snackwell? Now the Oreo has trans fats, so it's, that's another story. We won't talk about those today, that's another issue. Take a look at this. This was my 2nd grade daughter at the time, Miriam Lustig, came home and said, "Dad, you're not going to believe this. Here's a carton of Berkeley Farms low-fat milk, 1%, 130 calories, 15 grams of sugar, all lactose. That's milk sugar, that's not a problem. Okay? But it goes in the total sugars area. And here's Berkeley Farms 1% chocolate milk, 190 calories, 60 calories out, 29 grams of sugar, 14 grams of sugar, all high fructose corn syrup. So the milk manufacturers, back in the 80s, we basically went to 1%. Kids stopped drinking the milk in the school. And they said, well, we got to get the kids the vitamin D and the calcium somehow. So what they do, they made chocolate milk, they made strawberry milk, and they're still there too. So the question is, which was worse, the fat or the sugar? I would pose to you the sugar is way worse. The point is that every naturally occurring foodstuff on the planet, nature did this, God did this, has either fat or carbohydrate as its energy source. No food has both. Think about fatty fruits, coconut, avocado, olive. Fat, no carbohydrate. There are no foods that have both because there's no need for any food to have both. Only sugar has both because the carbohydrate comes from glucose. That's how glucose is metabolized. But fructose is not metabolized as carbohydrate. Fructose is metabolized as fat. Now, I don't have time to show you all the biochemistry that leads to that, but if you watch the 90-minute video on YouTube, The Sugar, the Bitter Truth, all the biochemical pathways are explained there and how sugar gets to fat. The 60 Minutes piece also describes it. Point is, we've had our entire food supply adulterated, fructosylated, right underneath our nose, with the addition of fructose for palatability, especially with the decrease in fat, and also ostensibly as a browning agent, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. That's a big issue. And also the removal of fiber, which I happen to think is equally important. And the reason why the sugar has caused so much damage is because it's not limited in how fast it hits our liver. Fiber was the method by which we used to reduce the rate of absorption. It's a kinetic issue. And without fiber, our livers are getting this onslaught, and it can't handle it. Okay? But we remove fiber for shelf life, because you can't freeze fiber, and also for freezing. So this was for decreasing depreciation. Good for them, bad for you. That's what we got here. We got good for them, bad for you. And of course, the substitution of trans fats, and we know why, hardening agent, shelf life. And we're removing those because we know that they're cardiovascularly, the devil incarnate. Okay? And Bloomberg knows it, and you know it, and everybody knows it, but it's still on the grass list at the FDA. Okay, let's talk now toxicity. So why do I say this stuff is really bad after all? Okay, here are the 10 most obese states in the country. No surprise. Here are the 10 laziest states in the country. What's going on over there now? Guess you can only burn so much energy going like this. Here are the 10 most unhappy states in America. Huh, interesting. Here's the adult diabetes rate. Notice anything? Here's the adult heart disease rate. And finally, here is soda per capita consumption. Now, this is correlation, not causation. And I am all about causation. I would not be standing up here talking to you if we didn't have causation. We got it. Okay? It's new. The food industry still says we don't, but we do. That's why I can talk to you about it, and some of the work is stuff we've done, and some of it's other people have done. But the bottom line is, it's there. I don't have time to go through it chapter and verse because this is a 1-hour talk. Here's the world per capita sugar supply, not consumption, supply. Okay? And this was from the Nature article. The American Heart Association currently says 150 to 200 calories per day is the threshold for added sugars. And you can see that virtually every country in the world is now above that threshold. And this is why every country is now experiencing non-communicable disease. And here's the world sugar consumption tripling over the course of the last 50 years. Notice Brazil, per capita consumption highest. They're also now sugar exporter, right? The BRIC countries. Turns out they have the highest increase in rate of prevalence of type 2. They don't have the highest prevalence, they have the highest increase in rate. They're catching up fast. Okay? And here's the prevalence of diabetes worldwide right now. Worst countries, Saudi Arabia and Malaysia. Saudi Arabia and Malaysia, how do they do this? No alcohol. But they got soft drinks like they're going out of style because it's hot. And that's their reward because there's no alcohol. Okay? And they're getting sick like you can't believe. And it's a big issue. And there was just a big meeting in Qatar just 2 weeks ago where this was identified as the issue. So they're catching on too. In fact, you can go on YouTube and there's a thing on Al Jazeera TV, okay, of me. I didn't do anything. They lifted it from Australian TV, but go see, it's amazing. Okay, next. What do all these 5 pictures have in common? They are all brown. Thank you. They're all brown. Right. They're brown. What is brown? Why is food brown? What is that? It's called the Browning reaction. It's called the Maillard reaction. Okay? And here is the Browning reaction going on in your body as we speak right now. This is rib cartilage in a newborn and in an 88-year-old. Okay? The bottom line is you can brown your meat at 375 degrees for an hour, or you can brown your meat at 98.6 degrees for 75 years. The answer, ultimately the outcome is the same. You laugh. It's not funny. This is what's going on in each of us right now. It's called the Maillard reaction. It's the same thing that causes hemoglobin A1C in diabetics. You know that the higher it is, the worse off you are. That's that reaction occurring where glucose binds to proteins non-enzymatically. Okay, and what we know is that fructose does that reaction 7 times faster than glucose because of its unique 5-membered ring stereochemistry. And again, I don't have all the time in the world to show this to you, but every time that reaction occurs, it releases a little molecule of hydrogen peroxide. Now, hydrogen peroxide is great if you've got a sore on your arm and you're trying to kill the bacteria, right? But it's not so great if your cells make it and it's trying to kill your cell or the proteins or the lipids inside your cell. Okay? That is the aging process. And fructose drives that aging process 7 times faster than glucose. Toxicity. And finally, third, fructose, because of its effects on the brain, and I'll talk about this at more length, increases total food consumption because it tricks the brain into thinking it's starving. It actually makes you want more. It works both through the hunger and reward systems to make you want more. And that's the reason for the 187 calories a day extra in men, 335 calories a day extra in women, and 275 extra in teen boys. Why? You think just because the food's there, that's why they're eating more of it? You know what? The food was there before. But they're eating more of it now because it's laden with sugar, and their brain isn't getting the signal that they even ate. David Ludwig showed this very nicely. Take a kid, give him a soft drink, and then let him loose at the fast food restaurant. Do they eat less or do they eat more? They eat more. They just took on 150 calories. They eat more because the brain never got the signal. There are 4 foodstuffs that work on the liver to create that liver fat. Trans fats, we know they're bad, so we're getting rid of them. Branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine. These are dietary amino acids you have to eat. Turns out, where do you get those from? Corn-fed beef. Ethanol, but kids don't drink ethanol. And finally, fructose. Fructose does this. And the reason all these 4 do this is, here are the 3 reasons. The liver's the only site for energy metabolism. They're not insulin regulated. They go straight into the liver and have to be dealt with. And there's no glycogen pop-off, liver starch pop-off for the extra. So they go straight to the mitochondria, the cell, the energy-burning factories in the cell. They overwhelm them. You might have called this mitochondrial constipation. Too much goes in, not enough comes out. And when that happens, your cells get sick, and you get sick, and you die. And these are the 4 guys who do it the most. Worse yet, there's no drug target for this, because mitochondrial overload makes those hydrogen peroxides, which lead to cell dysfunction, aging, and death. And the more you eat, the more of those you make, which is why the Caloric Restriction Society is so excited about what they do, because you're eating less, right? Anybody know about the Caloric Restriction Society? Okay, you know what they say? You know what the motto is? Okay, how's it go? You won't live longer, you'll just feel that way. Right? That's it. Okay. It also, when you overload the mitochondria, the cell has no choice but to engage in fat making, and that leads to liver insulin resistance and promotes the metabolic syndrome. Again, I refer you to the YouTube. The only options are reduce substrate availability. That means dietary modification. Now, not eat less, because that doesn't work. Eat less sugar. That works. Reduce hepatic flux. That's called fiber. Eat more fiber. And then finally, increase clearance. Burn it off before your liver has a chance to turn it into fat. And that's called exercise. So, diet and exercise. You came all the way here for that. But it's not just diet and exercise. It's very specific. And it has a very specific public health message. Okay, abuse. Mentioned, you eat more. Junk food addiction may be clue to obesity, right? Obesity and Reward. Here are 6 different books saying sugar is addictive. Everybody seems to know this except the scientists, right? Here's a brain of a control person, and these are dopamine receptors. This is where addiction occurs, is right here in the reward center, the nucleus accumbens. The brighter the red, the more dopamine receptors, and that's a good thing. You want lots of them. Here's a cocaine brain, and you see it's been down-regulated. When you down-regulate the receptors, that makes it harder for the dopamine to attach, because there are fewer receptors to attach to. That means you need more dopamine to occupy the fewer number of receptors. Therefore, you need more substrate to get there. That's called tolerance. Then you take the stuff away, and you have so few receptors, and there's no substrate there at all, and then you get sick and you feel bad, and that's called withdrawal. Tolerance, withdrawal, that's addiction. So here's a control brain, looking about the same as here, and here's an obese brain. Notice, same phenomenon, downregulation of the receptors. Not quite as bad as cocaine, but nonetheless there. It's weakly addictive. The difference is that for cocaine, it's not all over the place. But for sugar, we've got complete and utter system saturation. And you can't get away from it. So it's constantly tolerizing you. Therefore, you constantly need more because you can't escape it because it's everywhere. And this just, we looked at the foodstuffs in fast food. We looked at fat. It's not addictive, but it does increase salience because after all, what would you rather have, a Cinnabon or a pixie stick? Okay? Sugar increases the salience of fat and vice versa. Okay? That's why a cookie tastes so good. Salt. Salt is not addictive, but it's a learned preference. And the reason we know that is because we have kids with salt-losing diseases, whereas when we give them the right medicine, their preference for salt goes way down and gets much better. And so we know it's not addictive because it can be fixed by altering physiology. Sugar is weakly addictive and caffeine is moderately addictive. You put the two together, you increase the salience of the sugar, and now you got something really potent. It's called soda. Okay. So is there really such a thing as sugar addiction? Well, we need to look for the similarities to other drugs of dependence, nicotine, morphine, amphetamine, cocaine. The one I think is the big winner here is ethanol, because fructose and ethanol are virtually identical. Because after all, where do you get ethanol from? Fermentation of fructose. It's called wine, right? We do it in Napa Valley. The big difference between the two is that for ethanol, the yeast does the first step of metabolism. For fructose, we do our own first step of metabolism. But once they hit the mitochondria, it's all the same. So the same diseases that alcohol causes, sugar causes too. The criteria for addiction are the following. In animals, it's binging, withdrawal, craving, and then down here, cross-sensitization to other drugs of abuse, meaning you hook the animal on one drug, and then you expose the animal to a drug it's never seen before, and you get the same response because the dopamine center is still It's the same center, so it acts the same way. Okay, so they show enhanced locomotion and increased consumption. How about for humans? So here's the DSM-5 criteria for addiction. And those of you who take care of obese patients will recognize that every single one of these is what your patients are complaining about. And they also show tolerance and withdrawal. And I'm going to show you withdrawal up close and personal right now. Who has seen this movie? Good. Okay, so you'll all recognize this right here. Listen.
I was feeling bad in the car, feeling like shit. Really. I was feeling really, really sick and unhappy. Started eating. Feel great. Feel really good now. I feel so good, it's crazy. Isn't that right, baby?
Yeah, you're crazy.
Okay, now, this was on day 18 of Morgan Spurlock's journey through McDonald's. He was a vegan before that, right? His girlfriend was a vegan chef, right? Okay, in 18 days, he became a sugar addict because he just described withdrawal. And it can happen to anybody, and it happens all the time, and it happens to children especially, because I have to take care of them. And it's very hard to get them off. And it's even harder to get them off because the parents are addicts too. And so even though you tell the parents that the kid can't have the sodas, they keep the sodas in the house for them. And this is one of the reasons for recidivism as well. We got to deal with the parents too. Okay, here's the point. There are toxic substances that are not abused. Iron, vitamin D, pseudoephedrine until you turn it into crystal meth. These are not, it's not necessary to regulate these, okay? They'll kill you if you take too much, but we don't have to regulate them because there's no abuse potential. We also have abused substances that are not toxic. For instance, caffeine. And if you take my coffee away from me, I will kill you. Okay? Nicotine is not toxic. You can buy Nicorette gum down at the Walgreens, right? It's the tars that'll kill you, but not the nicotine itself. But boy, oh boy, is it addictive, right? Okay. But when we have toxic substances that are also abused, both, now you got a problem, like morphine and heroin, amphetamine, cocaine, ethanol, and sadly, sugar, toxic and abused. And educational efforts alone do not fix substances of abuse. You cannot educate people away from addiction. Did Nancy Reagan's Just Say No work? QED. And finally, externalities, negative detriments on society. How does your obesity affect me? Because that's really important, right? Because, if you want to go drink sodas and it doesn't bother anybody else, go kill yourself. But when it affects me, it's a different story. Societal intervention requires externalities. So if you smoke, drink, or take drugs, it's bad for me. Secondhand smoke from cigarettes, car accidents from alcohol, declining house prices from the drug den down the street, altered work and productivity and absenteeism, right? You don't want to do somebody else's job because they're a coke addict, right? So how does your obesity affect me? $274 million extra on jet fuel. Discomfort on the subway. Sinking of boats due to the weight. Lake George, 2003, boat was coded for 17 160-pound people. They had 24 195-pound people, and they went over. Okay. In fact, the Victoria ferry from Vancouver to Victoria just reduced its number of people allowed on the boat by 25%. No, here's the real reason. 65 billion reduction in work productivity, 50% increase in absenteeism, 50% increase in health insurance premiums, 150 billion wasted in healthcare resources. That would solve the entire budget deficit. If we had obesity reform, not only we would not need healthcare reform, we wouldn't even need financial reform. Obesity is a threat to national security because 70% of the recruits are 4F'd due to obesity. And finally, the government pays twice. They pay for the corn subsidy, and then they pay for the ER visits. And Obamacare is not going to fix the ER visits, if it lasts. Point is, the American Heart Association has gotten religion. They understand that the low-fat directive was not appropriate, and they have come back and have now come out, and I'm happy and proud to say I was part of the writing group on this, and we recommend reduction in sugar intake from 22 teaspoons per day average to 9 for males and 6 for females, a reduction by 2/3 to get below that toxic threshold where your liver actually gets sick. Okay, what does the sugar industry have to say about all of this? Obviously, not good things.